Have you ever wondered what happens when the water runs out? In California, that's not a hypothetical question. It's a reality unfolding right now. The state is grappling with one of its greatest challenges, a historic water crisis that's forcing a complete reinvention of how it manages its most precious resource. For decades, California's booming agriculture industry relied on a seemingly endless supply of water pumped from underground aquifers. But that era is over. A new law, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, is forcing a reckoning. By 2040, local agencies must balance the water they pump with the water they recharge. This sounds simple, but for farmers, it's an existential threat. Many will have to drastically cut their water use, which means taking thousands of acres of farmland out of production. Think about that for a moment. Entire communities built around agriculture are now facing economic collapse. And this isn't just a California problem. The impact could ripple across the country, affecting the food you buy at the grocery store. But what's the alternative? Proponents of the law say we can't keep draining our savings account. Continuing to overpump aquifers is unsustainable. It's a path that leads to a far more catastrophic collapse down the road. They also point out that for years, this overpumping primarily benefited large corporate farms, while smaller, more vulnerable communities often paid the highest price, with their wells running dry. So, if we can't rely on groundwater like we used to, where will the water come from? This is where innovation and technology come into play. One idea that's often floated is desalination, turning ocean water into drinking water. California already has one of the largest desalination plants in the Americas, near San Diego, producing millions of liters of fresh water every day. But this isn't a silver bullet. Desalination is incredibly expensive and uses a massive amount of energy. The water it produces costs several times more than water from traditional sources. Plus, it creates a super salty byproduct called brine, which can harm marine life when pumped back into the ocean. Despite these hurdles, several new desalination plants are being proposed along the coast. Another, perhaps more promising solution is something you might have heard of as toilet to tap. I know the name isn't great, but the science is solid. This is water recycling. Modern technology can treat wastewater to a level that is often purer than the water in our rivers and lakes. Countries like Singapore and Israel have been doing this successfully for years. California is expanding its own recycling programs, but it's a slow process, partly because of the public's psychological ick factor, even though experts confirm it's perfectly safe. We also need to get better at capturing the water we do get. California's climate is becoming a story of extremes, what scientists call hydroclimatological whiplash. We swing from devastating droughts to catastrophic floods. Huge storms, known as atmospheric rivers, can dump unbelievable amounts of rain in just a few days. The problem? Our current water systems were built decades ago and weren't designed to capture this sudden deluge. Most of that precious rainwater just washes out to the ocean. Imagine if we could redesign our cities to act like sponges. Green infrastructure projects like permeable pavements that let water soak through and special basins that help it seep back into the ground could help us replenish our aquifers. We're also exploring building more underground reservoirs, which are far more efficient than surface lakes because they don't lose water to evaporation. Of course, technology alone won't solve this. The crisis is forcing a deeper conversation about California's identity. Do we need to rethink our entire agricultural model? Should we shift to growing crops that use less water, or even accept that we have to farm less land? These are tough, controversial questions. This water war is also a battle for justice. Who truly has the right to water when there isn't enough to go around? For decades, the water rights of Indigenous communities, guaranteed by historic treaties, have been largely ignored. Rivers that are central to their culture and survival have been diverted and degraded. Now they are demanding a seat at the table, arguing that their traditional knowledge of resource management holds valuable lessons for a sustainable future. Environmental justice groups also highlight that the crisis hits low-income communities and communities of color the hardest. They are often the first to lose access to clean, affordable water, and the last to see investment in new infrastructure. How do we balance economic needs, environmental protection, and social equity? And who should foot the bill for this massive statewide transition? There are no easy answers, The future of water in California will depend on a combination of bold innovation, massive investment, and difficult political compromises. It requires us to rethink our relationship with water, not as an infinite commodity, but as a finite, shared resource that we must all protect. What do you think is the most promising solution? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this video informative and want to learn more about the critical issues shaping our world, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Within the agricultural sector, not all crops are equal when it comes to water consumption. Some require massive amounts, while others are relatively efficient. And this is where the water war becomes even more complex and controversial. Almond trees, for example, have become a major target of criticism. California produces about 80% of the world's almonds, an industry that moves billions of dollars annually. But almond trees are thirsty. Each almond requires approximately 3.8 liters of water to produce. During a severe drought, while rural communities ran out of drinking water, vast almond plantations continued to be irrigated. Proponents of the almond industry argue that the crop generates jobs, export revenue, and that farmers have legal rights to the water they use. They also point out that they have invested in more efficient irrigation technologies and that demonizing a single crop diverts attention from larger systemic problems. Other equally thirsty crops include alfalfa, walnuts, pistachios, and rice. Alfalfa, in particular, is the subject of controversy because much of it is exported to feed livestock in other countries, including China and Saudi Arabia. Critics argue that California is essentially exporting its scarce water in the form of hay. The livestock industry also consumes significant amounts of water, both directly and through feed production. It is estimated that producing 1 kilogram of beef requires tens of thousands of liters of water when the entire production chain is considered. Dairy farming, a mainstay of the Californian agricultural economy, is also water-intensive. But the discussion about which crop should be prioritized is only part of the problem. The fundamental issue is that California is trying to grow an amount of food that exceeds the state's water capacity. And this has been possible for decades through a practice that is now reaching its limits. Groundwater extraction. Aquifers are natural reservoirs of water stored in porous rock formations below the surface. For centuries, they have slowly filled with rainwater and snowmelt that percolates through the soil. In California, farmers and communities rely heavily on these aquifers, especially during periods of drought when surface sources fail. The problem is that water is being extracted much faster than it can be naturally replenished. This process, known as aquifer depletion, is causing serious consequences. In some regions of the Central Valley, the ground is literally sinking, a phenomenon called subsidence, at alarming rates. Areas that have sunk several meters have become permanently unable to store water, forever destroying the capacity of the aquifers. Wells need to be drilled deeper and deeper to reach water, costing tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars, an impossible investment for small farmers and poor communities. While large corporate agricultural operations can afford wells 600 meters deep or more, small landowners and low-income residents are literally left dry. For decades, groundwater extraction in California was essentially unregulated, operating under the doctrine that landowners had an unrestricted right to the water beneath their properties. This changed in 2014 with the passage of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, which for the first time required aquifers to be managed sustainably. California's water situation didn't emerge out of nowhere. It's the result of decades of political decisions, rampant population growth, and a development philosophy that assumed there would always be water available for new projects. During the 20th century, California transformed itself from a relatively arid region into a global agricultural and urban hub, but this was only possible through monumental and, many argue, unsustainable water engineering. California's water history has been marked by conflict from the beginning. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Los Angeles expanded aggressively by obtaining water rights to the Owens Valley, hundreds of miles to the north. The project, orchestrated by engineer William Mulholland, diverted water that sustained entire agricultural communities, transforming the once fertile Owens Valley into a barren, abandoned landscape. This episode, known as the California Water Wars, was immortalized in the 1974 film Chinatown. But it wasn't an isolated incident. Throughout the 20th century, numerous water diversion projects generated conflicts between regions, always following the same pattern. Wealthy and politically powerful urban areas obtained water from poorer and less influential rural regions. The California State Water Project, initiated in the 1960s, was the ultimate expression of this philosophy. It diverted water from the Sacramento River in the north to feed farms in the Central Valley and cities in Southern California. The project was marketed as a solution for the state's development, but it created structural dependencies that are now proving unsustainable in the face of climate change. Today, the struggle for water has become even more complex. It's not just cities versus farms or north versus south. Now there are multiple actors with conflicting interests. Farmers from different cultures, technology companies needing water to cool their data centers, communities fighting for basic rights to access clean water, Indigenous tribes claiming historic rights to rivers, and environmentalists trying to protect ecosystems on the brink of collapse. One of the most emblematic conflicts occurs in the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta, where freshwater from the Sacramento and San Joaquin rivers meets before flowing into the San Francisco Bay. This region is crucial both for human water supplies and for the survival of endangered species, such as the Delta smelt, a small fish that has become a symbol of the tensions between development and conservation. Environmentalists argue that overpumping from the Delta is destroying the ecosystem and pushing native species to extinction. Farmers counter that pumping restrictions threaten food production and the regional economy. The federal and state governments are caught in the middle, trying to balance environmental legal requirements, economic pressures, and political realities. Rural communities, especially those with predominantly Latino and low-income populations in the Central Valley, face the harshest consequences of the water crisis. Hundreds of domestic wells have dried up, forcing families to rely on bottled water for basic needs such as drinking, cooking, and bathing. In some communities, water trucks have become the only source of water, a shocking reality for a state that is the fifth largest economy in the world. Meanwhile, in cities like Los Angeles and San Diego, residents face water restrictions, such as limits on watering lawns and washing cars. While these measures are important, they represent a fraction of the state's total water consumption. Agriculture continues to account for the vast majority of water use, sparking heated debates about priorities and equity. California has always been a land of contrasts. On one side, sunny beaches and vibrant cities like Los Angeles and San Francisco. On the other, the Central Valley, one of the most productive agricultural regions in the world, responsible for feeding not only the United States, but also exporting food to dozens of countries. But there's something that unites all these places: a critical dependence on an increasingly scarce resource: water. In recent years, California has faced one of the worst droughts in its modern history. Reservoirs that once overflowed now show cracked and dry banks. Rivers that once ran wild have turned into trickles, and what was once considered an abundant resource has become the center of an increasingly fierce dispute between farmers, urban dwellers, environmentalists, and corporations. This isn't just an environmental crisis. It's a social, economic, and political crisis that is redefining the future of America's most populous state. The war for water has already begun, and its consequences extend far beyond California's borders. To understand the gravity of the situation, we need to look at the numbers. California has approximately 39 million inhabitants, representing about 12% of the U.S. population. The state produces more than a third of the country's vegetables and two-thirds of its fruits and nuts. This massive agricultural production depends on complex irrigation systems that consume about 80% of all water used in the state. The problem is that California doesn't have enough water to sustain all of this naturally. The state has always relied on an elaborate system of aqueducts, reservoirs, and water diversion projects that bring the resource from other regions. The largest of these projects is the California Aqueduct, which is over 100 kilometers long and transports water from the north to the south of the state. But this system, largely built in the 1960s and 1970s, was designed based on climatic assumptions that no longer correspond to current reality. Climate change has profoundly altered precipitation patterns, reducing the amount of snow accumulated in the Sierra Nevada mountains, the state's main source of fresh water. Historically, the snow accumulated in the mountains during the winter gradually melted in the spring and summer, feeding rivers and reservoirs. This natural system functioned like a giant water tank, releasing water steadily throughout the drier months. However, with global warming, higher temperatures are causing rain where snow once fell, and what does fall is melting faster, creating peak flows followed by long periods of scarcity. Between 2012 and 2016, California experienced a drought so severe that it was considered the worst in 1 in 200 years, according to tree ring studies. Important reservoirs fell to less than 20% of their capacity. Wells dried up in rural communities. Farmers were forced to uproot fruit trees that took decades to grow, and devastating wildfires became the new normal. Even after a few years of relief with wetter winters, the state plunged back into extreme drought conditions. Lake Oroville, California's second-largest reservoir, reached such low levels that its hydroelectric turbines had to be shut down for the first time in history. Lake Shasta, the largest reservoir, also reached critical levels, revealing structures and landscapes submerged for decades.